Nobody in Cedar Hollow, Tennessee could quite figure out why 14-year-old Reese Kowalczyk spent every Saturday that June building birdhouses in Otto Larson's side yard, on a farm that had nothing to do with her, for a man she wasn't related to and had barely known 2 months earlier. Reese had come to Cedar Hollow that spring, her third placement in 18 months, living with her foster parents, Marcus and Denise Whitfield, on the property just down the road from Otto's 90-acre cattle operation. She hadn't been assigned the work. Nobody had asked her to do it. She'd simply walked over one afternoon in early May, introduced herself to the elderly widower over his fence line, and asked if she could use the scrap lumber piled behind his equipment shed. Otto, 74 and quieter than most people in Cedar Hollow found comfortable, had said yes without asking many questions, and by June, Reese had built 11 birdhouses, mounted along Otto's fence posts and porch eaves, each one a little more carefully finished than the last. What nobody in Cedar Hollow knew, not Reese, not the Whitfields, not even most of Otto's own family, was that Otto had been watching Reese work from his kitchen window nearly every Saturday since she started. For reasons that had nothing to do with birdhouses at all, and everything to do with a granddaughter he'd lost 6 years earlier. If stories about belonging, quiet connection, and finding family in unexpected places matter to you, this is exactly the kind of story we tell every week. Go ahead and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if this story moves you, tap that like button before you go. It genuinely helps this small channel find the people who care about stories like Reese's. Now let's find out why Otto Larson was really watching that girl build birdhouses, and what it ended up meaning for both of them. Cedar Hollow sits in the rolling farm country of eastern Tennessee, a small enough community that everyone generally knew everyone else's business within a week of it happening, whether they meant to or not. Otto Larson had farmed his cattle operation there for over 50 years, most of them alongside his wife, Ingrid, who'd passed away 4 years before Reese ever showed up on his property, and his son, Peter, who'd moved to Knoxville decades earlier and visited only a few times a year with his own family in tow. Otto's granddaughter, Willa, had been the one exception to that distance, spending most of her childhood summers at the farm before a rare, aggressive form of leukemia took her at 12 years old, 6 years before the summer Reese arrived in Cedar Hollow. Willa had loved birds with the particular, all-consuming focus some children bring to a single interest, and had spent her last several summers on the farm building simple wooden birdhouses with Otto's guidance, mounting them around the property one by one, a project she'd never quite finished before she got too sick to keep working on it. Otto had never touched the unfinished birdhouses in his shed after Willa died. He hadn't talked about them much either, not even to Peter, who knew the general outline of his daughter's illness and death but had never fully understood how much of his father's quiet, withdrawn years afterward had centered on that one unfinished project sitting untouched behind the equipment shed. Reese, for her part, knew nothing about any of this when she first walked onto Otto's property that May. She'd been placed with the Whitfields after a difficult stretch in her previous foster home 2 counties over, and Denise Whitfield, a warm, no-nonsense woman who fostered children the way some people keep an open-door policy, always the same steady welcome regardless of what a kid arrived carrying with them, had noticed early on that Reese needed a project, something steady in hers, in a life that had handed her very little continuity over the past year and a half. Reese had always been good with her hands, a skill she'd picked up, somewhat out of necessity, from a previous placement where a foster father had run a small woodworking shop and let her help out more out of convenience than mentorship. When she noticed the scrap lumber pile behind Otto's shed from the fence line one afternoon, and noticed, more specifically, several half-finished, dust-covered birdhouse frames sitting among the scrap, something about them caught her attention in a way she couldn't fully explain even to herself. She asked Otto directly if she could use the wood. Otto, standing on his porch with the particular stillness of a man who'd spent years mostly alone, studied her for a long moment before he answered. "That's my granddaughter's project," he said. "She never finished it." Reese asked if she could finish it for him. Otto didn't answer right away. He simply nodded once and told her the shed wasn't locked. Denise Whitfield, when Reese mentioned the arrangement that evening, made a point of walking over to Otto's property herself the following morning, introducing herself properly, confirming directly with Otto that he was comfortable with a 14-year-old working on his land, and establishing in the plain, practical way Denise handled most things, that Reese would only be there on weekend afternoons, always with Marcus or Denise aware of exactly where she was, and that Otto understood he was. Welcome to call the Whitfield house directly anytime with questions or concerns. Otto agreed to all of it without argument, and Denise came away from that conversation with the impression of a genuinely lonely old man rather than anyone she needed to worry about. Reese started the following Saturday, working through the pile of half-finished frames Willa had left behind years earlier, matching the proportions and joinery as closely as she could from what remained. Though she developed her own touches as she went, a slightly different roof pitch, a small perch ledge Willa's original design hadn't included. Otto watched from his kitchen window most Saturdays, rarely coming outside to supervise directly, though he'd occasionally bring out a glass of lemonade or answer a question when Reese called one out toward the house. Neighbors along the county road noticed the arrangement developing over the following weeks, the way neighbors in a small community generally do. Verna Castellano, who lived on the property adjoining Otto's on the north side, mentioned to a friend at church that she'd seen the foster girl from the Whitfield place out at Otto Larson's most every Saturday, and wasn't quite sure what to make of it. An old widower and a teenage girl he wasn't related to, spending that much time together on an isolated farm property. The comment traveled the way comments do in small towns, picking up a slightly uneasy edge it hadn't started with, until Denise Whitfield, hearing a diluted version of it from another foster parent at a support group meeting, decided the simplest response was the most direct one. She invited Verna over for coffee, explained the full arrangement plainly, the standing agreement with Otto, the Saturday-only schedule, her own regular check-ins with Otto by phone, and the fact that Reese's caseworker, a steady, thorough woman named Priscilla Nguyen, had been informed of the arrangement from the beginning and had visited the farm herself once to confirm everything was exactly as described. Verna's concern, once she understood the full picture, shifted mostly into curiosity about why a grieving old widower had let a stranger's foster child anywhere near his late granddaughter's unfinished project in the first place. A question Denise couldn't fully answer either, since Otto hadn't explained his reasons to her any more than he had to Reese. What Otto had never told anyone, not Denise, not Peter, not Reese herself, was how closely watching Reese work reminded him of watching Willa, not because the two girls looked alike or acted alike in any obvious way, but because of something harder to name, the same total, absorbed concentration Willa used to bring to sanding a rough edge smooth, the same habit of talking quietly to herself while she worked out a measurement problem. Otto found himself, more than once that June, standing at his kitchen window longer than he meant to, watching a stranger's foster kid finish a dead child's unfinished project, and feeling something in his chest loosen slightly for the first time in 6 years. By early July, Reese had finished all 11 remaining frames from Willa's original pile, mounting each one around the property in locations she chose herself, along fence posts, under porch eaves, near the old orchard at the property's edge. She'd started, without really planning to, keeping a small notebook of her own, noting which birdhouses attracted nesting pairs first, sketching rough maps of the property with birdhouse locations marked, an echo, though she didn't know it, of a habit Willa had kept in a nearly identical notebook Otto still had tucked in a dresser drawer. The crisis, when it came that August, had nothing to do with weather or disaster and everything to do with the particular instability that defines foster care. Reese's caseworker, Priscilla Nguyen, informed the Whitfields in early August that a placement opening had come up with a relative of Reese's, a great-aunt in Georgia who'd recently come forward after months of the state trying to locate any extended family willing to take her. And that state policy generally prioritized kinship placements, meaning Reese would likely be moved within a matter of weeks, regardless of how settled she'd become in Cedar Hollow. Reese told Otto about the move the following Saturday, standing at his fence line the way she had that first afternoon in May, and Otto, for the first time in the 2 months he'd known her, came all the way out to the fence instead of watching from the window. He didn't say much at first. Then he asked her, plainly, if she wanted to stay in Cedar Hollow, or if the move to Georgia felt like something she was looking forward to. Reese admitted, more honestly than she'd expected to manage, that she didn't know her great-aunt at all, that the move felt like starting over again in a way she was tired of doing, and that Cedar Hollow, for the first time in 18 months, had started to feel like somewhere she might actually get to stay. Otto called Denise Whitfield that same evening, and the conversation that followed involved considerably more people than just the two of them over the following weeks. Priscilla Nguyen, a family court attorney Otto retained through the County Bar Association's referral service, and eventually Peter, who drove down from Knoxville once his father explained, haltingly and for the first time in 6 years, exactly why an unfinished pile of birdhouses had mattered enough to bring a stranger's foster kid onto his property in the first place. The legal process that followed was neither quick nor simple, and nobody involved pretended otherwise. Kinship placement policies existed for good reasons, and Reese's great-aunt, once properly consulted through the state's process, turned out to be a reasonable, well-meaning woman who ultimately agreed, after several conversations facilitated by Priscilla and Gwyn, that Reese's own clearly expressed wishes and her established stability in Cedar Hollow outweighed a kinship connection that had, until that point, existed mostly on paper. The Whitfields formalized their long-term foster arrangement with additional support and involvement from Otto, who set up a modest educational trust for Reese through his attorney that autumn, plainly stating, when Peter asked him about it directly, that he wasn't trying to replace anyone, only that he'd learned the hard way what it cost to leave something unfinished, and he didn't intend to make that mistake twice. By the following spring, the birdhouses around Otto's property numbered closer to 20. Reese, having started designing her own beyond the frames Willa had left behind. Otto came outside every Saturday now instead of watching from the window, and the two of them worked mostly in comfortable silence, the way people do when neither one needs to explain themselves to the other anymore. Verna Castellano, once she understood the full shape of what had actually happened that summer, told Denise at church that she felt foolish for ever having worried, though Denise told her plainly that the worry itself hadn't been foolish, only the assumption underneath it, and that the whole community, including Otto himself, had done the careful, transparent work of proving that assumption wrong rather than simply resenting it. Reese never made much of what happened that summer. When people asked her about it later, she usually said some version of the same thing. She just wanted something steady to work on, and it turned out the thing she built ended up building something back. A connection neither she nor Otto had been looking for, found in a pile of scrap lumber and an old man's unfinished grief. There is a particular kind of belonging that gets built slowly, out of ordinary Saturday afternoons and unglamorous, patient work, rather than any single dramatic moment. Reese Kowalczyk hadn't set out to become part of Otto Larson's family, and Otto hadn't set out to find, in a stranger's foster kid, a second chance at finishing something he'd once loved. They'd simply kept showing up, week after week, to the same quiet work, and in doing that, faithfully and without much explanation to anyone watching, they built something that outlasted the summer it started in.